Земля в иллюминаторе, земля в иллюминаторе, земля в иллюминаторе видна. Как сын грустит о матери, как сын грустит о матери, грустим мы о земле, она одна. А звезды тем не менее, а звезды тем не менее, чуть ближе, но все так же холодны. И как в часы затмения, и как в часы затмения, ждем света и земные видим сны. И снится нам не рокот космодрома, не эта ледяная синева, а снится нам трава, трава у дома, зеленая, зеленая трава.
The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-25PD is a third-generation Soviet fighter that saw service throughout the world. Both in real life and as an event vehicle in War Thunder, it stands out as a very unique and record-breaking plane. In this video, we'll take a look at the Foxbat, going into its history, its state in War Thunder, and how to play it. Throughout the Cold War, the PVO, Soviet Air Defense Force, was assigned to be the USSR's strategic air defense. While this important role included more mundane duties like dealing with accidental border violations, their most crucial task was defending the Soviet Union's vast airspace against US reconnaissance aircraft and, most importantly, strategic bombers, which by the late 1950s were carrying free-fall nuclear bombs and were steadily achieving better performance, going higher and faster than ever before. The newly developed U-2 spy plane, performing very high altitude missions over the USSR, revealed the need for a higher altitude interceptor than were available at the time. As such, the Mikoyan-Gurevich OKB had been working on a series of interceptors in the latter half of the 1950s, notably the YE-150 series, which were noteworthy as they had been built specifically to test the Tumansky R-15 engine, a very powerful afterburning turbojet that had initially been used on the Tupolev Tu-123 reconnaissance drone. These prototypes eventually gave way to the Tupolev Tu-128 as the PVO's next interceptor, although the work done on them was used in the development of the MiG-25. Work on what would eventually become the Foxbat started in mid-1959, and after evaluating different layouts, the design was made to put two R-15s side by side in the rear, instead of vertically like the English Electric Lightning, or in the nacelles. Consideration was even given to making the new aircraft capable of VTOL, but the fuel-hungry R-15s meant that it would need all the fuel it could carry, and so that idea was abandoned. The same fuel considerations led to the scrapping of the ideas to have a second seat for a navigator, as well as variable sweep wings. Development of the MiG-25 was spurred on by news and intelligence about the new American XB-70 Valkyrie and the SR-71 Blackbird, both of which would have been too fast and high-flying for any of the PVO's current interceptors to intercept. Because of the thermal stress on the airframe when flying above Mach 2, MiG had difficulties choosing what to build the aircraft out of. While they initially wanted to make it out of titanium, which would have been ideal due to its lower weight, it was both expensive and very difficult to work with. They were unable to solve the issues of cracks in welded titanium, so the much heavier nickel steel was used instead. This cost far less and allowed for welding and heat-resistant seals. As such, the MiG-25 was built from 80% nickel steel alloy, 11% aluminium, and 9% titanium, using a mix of spot welding, automatic machine welding, and hand arc welding. Despite the initial intention to design the aircraft as an interceptor, the first prototype that flew was the YE-155R1, a reconnaissance variant, which took flight on the 6th of March 1964, with the first interceptor prototype, the YE-155P1, taking flight on the 9th of September that year. MiG soon realized that the new aircraft's performance gave it great potential to set flight records, and several of the prototypes were made lighter for these attempts. All in all, 29 records were claimed, including 7 all-time world records for time to height and speed, some of which still stand to this day. Full-scale production of the interceptor variant, the MiG-25P, began in 1971, and 460 of these were built over the next 11 years. This featured the TL-25 Smerch-A radar, a development of the radar carried on the Tu-128. The Smerch was a ludicrously powerful radar, emitting a maximum of 600 kilowatts, a number that dwarfs even the radars used today. This was to allow it to quite literally burn through practically all jamming and countermeasures of the time, and was actually restricted for use low above civilian areas as a result. The downside is that it completely lacked a look-down shoot-down capability, meaning that it would have a great disadvantage against low-flying aircraft. The complement to the Smerch was the Biznavat R-40 missile, available in both semi-active radar homing and infrared homing variants as the R-40R and R-40T respectively. A fitting match for the Foxbat, these missiles were huge, being fitted with huge warheads to deal with the XB-70s and other strategic bombers that they expected to be firing at. The R-40s were the largest air-to-air missiles to ever enter production, being slightly larger than the MIM-23 Hawk SAM. Standard PVO procedure was to salvo 2 missiles at a single target, first an R-40T and then an R-40R, to ensure it would have a harder time evading, but also to avoid the T locking onto the R's solid rocket motor. The MiG-25 was capable of exceeding Mach 3 and flying above 27 kilometers, although its high speed wasn't without issues. While the engines could push the airframe to Mach 3.2, this was only to be done in combat and emergencies, as going above Mach 3 would significantly shorten the lifetime of the engines. This wasn't a surprise, as the Foxbat was designed to be very easy to maintain. Soviet maintainers liked working on it, partly because the engine coolant could be siphoned off and distilled into alcohol, and partly because it rarely broke, with only the engines needing attention, but being very easy to remove, repair, and replace if needed. The MiG-25 was first publicly displayed at the Moscow Air Show in early July 1967, where Western observers saw its large wings, high speed, and terrifyingly large engines, and concluded that it was a multi-role fighter-bomber and all-weather interceptor, capable of strong maneuverability and speeds above Mach 2.5, being built out of titanium and far outmatching anything they had at the time. While not the reason for the F-15's development, as is often claimed, the MiG-25 vaguely resembled the F-X's designs, which eventually led to the F-15 being focused more on air superiority instead of as a more evenly balanced multi-role that was to meet the expected performance of the Foxbat. NATO's first real understanding of the true nature of the MiG-25 came in the form of Viktor Belenko's defection. On the 6th of September 1976, Belenko, a lieutenant in the PVO, defected. Taking off from near Vladivostok on a training flight with several other members of his squadron, he deviated from his flight plan and began to evade radar, descending down initially to drop off Soviet radars, before later climbing again to achieve the range he needed to make the flight. Initially planning to land at Chitose Air Base near Sapporo after being intercepted, Japanese radar was unable to accurately track Belenko, and the 2 F-4EJ fighters sent to intercept him were unable to locate him despite being very new for the JASDF. With fuel running very low and needing to land quickly, he located Hakodate Airport in southern Hokkaido and began to land there. He circled it 3 times before landing, almost hitting a Boeing 727 that was taking off. The runway was too short for the Foxbat, so despite deploying his drogue parachute, the front tire burst and the plane ran 240 meters off the runway's end, stopping just before an antenna with only 30 seconds of fuel remaining. Belenko was immediately arrested by Japanese police, and upon being interviewed, he requested political asylum in the US. Despite Soviet requests, he was moved to Tokyo and granted asylum on the 8th, leaving the next day. The MiG-25 was eventually moved to Hyakuri, where it was examined by US specialists. Due to Soviet pressure, Japan forbade the US from flying it or taking it to the USA, so the decision was made to carefully disassemble it and perform a detailed ground study. While the Foxbat was shipped back to the USSR, completely disassembled 67 days later, NATO had obtained a much clearer understanding of the MiG-25. It was exposed that, While certainly a capable aircraft, the MiG-25 relied on much older technology than originally expected, with the Smerch still using vacuum tubes. It was also shown to be significantly heavier and less nimble since it was made of steel. While the engineering done on the Foxbat was impressive, it was a sigh of relief that the USSR didn't have a fleet of secret superfighters. As a result of the compromise of the MiG-25P's radar and missile systems, two changes were made. First, with the Foxbat no longer being a secret, the Soviets began to allow export sales, which led to it being operated by Algeria, Bulgaria, India, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. Second, and most notably for us today, MiG began developing an updated version, the MiG-25PD. The MiG-25PD had a number of notable changes from the MiG-25P. Starting with the radar, the famous Smerch A was replaced with the Sapphire 25, a newer design based off the MiG-23's Sapphire 23. This featured much better look-down shoot-down capabilities and an MTI mode, and was coupled with an IRST system. The ability to carry 4 R-60M missiles was also added, being mounted on double outer pylons. Finally, the engine was upgraded to the R-15 BD300, which offered an increased engine lifespan and a little more power. The R-40 missiles also saw upgrades, becoming the R-40D and R-40TD, which featured more sensitive seekers, better IRCCM, and compatibility with the new Sapphire 25. All in all, 104 MiG-25PDs were newly built, with most of the remaining MiG-25P fleet being upgraded to that standard as the MiG-25PDS. As briefly mentioned earlier, the MiG-25 didn't only exist as an interceptor. A number of different variants allowed the Foxbat to leverage its advantages, usually its ludicrous speed and service ceiling, to perform a variety of roles. The first of these was the MiG-25R, which featured cameras and ELINT equipment. This was later derived into the MiG-25RB, which featured the Peleng automatic bombing system and a payload of up to 8 500kg bombs. While it may sound boring at first, I find the RB to be very interesting. While most aircraft aren't able to drop bombs above Mach, the RB carried specialized bombs with heat shielding, which allowed them to be dropped at speeds above Mach 2. Its Peleng bombing computer acted like an autopilot, and would automatically fly the plane and drop the bombs at a pre-programmed target, which allowed for a remarkable degree of accuracy for such a high and fast drop. The next major variant was the MiG-25BM, which was a seed aircraft, armed with KH-58 or KH-31 anti-radiation missiles. There was also the Ugly Duckling, the two-seat conversion trainer MiG-25PU, which was unarmed, radarless, and rather quite painful to look at. Finally, while not technically a variant as it was never built, let alone prototyped, I feel it would be improper not to mention the proposed business jet variant, because nothing says Concorde eat your heart out like going Mach 3 with passengers. The MiG-25 had a long service life across a number of nations, seeing combat and doing rather well for an exported Soviet plane. While looking at air-to-air combat, that is, only looking at the interceptor variants, as the recon and bomber variants had no air-to-air weapons, excluding losses to SAMs and only counting other fighters as targets, the MiG-25 managed a loss ratio better than 1-to-1, despite often coming upon aircraft significantly more modern than it. In Soviet service, the Foxbat never fired a shot in anger. Through 1971 to 1972, Soviet MiG-25 stationed in Egypt flew reconnaissance missions over the Israeli-occupied Sinai roughly 20 times, being tracked at least once going over Mach 3.2 by their radar. In one incident, a Foxbat was met by 2 Israeli F-4Es and fired upon, although it escaped unharmed. Elsewhere in the world, the Swedish Air Force regularly observed Soviet MiG-25s performing intercepts on SR-71s over the Baltic Sea in the 1980s. One rather embarrassing incident involved a MiG-25P shooting down an innocent cow when a dummy missile fell off the rail during landing, directly hitting the poor animal. Algeria operated both interceptors and recon variants, and despite not using them in combat, they regularly flew over the Western Sahara and Morocco during the Western Sahara conflict, with the Moroccans powerless to intercept them. On one occasion, they reportedly flew over both Spain and Morocco in a single long-range flight, alarming Spain into urgently purchasing F-18 Hornets to drive off further incursions. In Syrian service, the MiG-25 saw aerial combat, but with limited success, as multiple were lost to Israeli F-15s in the 1980s. There was still some success, however, where in 1981, at the loss of one Foxbat, another scored a good hit on an F-15, which ended up being written off after limping back to base. Most were withdrawn from service by 2011, but a few saw limited action against rebel forces in 2012 and 2014, until they were destroyed on the ground in 2024 by Israeli airstrikes. India also operated the Foxbat, specifically the MiG-25 RBK, a further developed RB. These were a heavily guarded secret and were used extensively in the Kargil War for carrying out recon. In 1997, an IAF Foxbat flew over Pakistani airspace and exceeded Mach 3, which caused an incident as the Pakistani government contended that the loud sonic boom was a deliberate attempt to make the point that no PAF plane could come close to its altitude. Libya was a major user of the MiG-25 and operated nearly 100. During the 1980s, they took part in the Gulf of Sidra incident, although didn't engage in any combat. The fleet was grounded by 2011 due to a lack of maintenance, which meant they were spared during NATO attacks. The final nation whose Foxbats had a notable service history was Iraq, who were responsible for all of the MiG-25's confirmed air-to-air kills. It was in service with the Iraqi Air Force during the Iran-Iraq War, where they claimed 15. Between 1982 and 1987, MiG-25PDs were responsible for downing 4 F-4Es, 3 F-5Es, 1 F-14, 2 C-130s, and 1 Fokker F-27. In exchange, one reconnaissance MiG-25R was shot down by an F-14, and another RB was downed by an HQ-2 SAM, a Chinese variant of the S-75. The bomber variants were also used as strike aircraft during the war, targeting Iranian cities. The Iran-Iraq War wasn't the only conflict the Iraqi Foxbats found themselves in, however, as the Iraqi Air Force soon found itself in the Gulf War, put against the USAF's finest. Despite this, the MiG-25 was responsible for the first American death of the war, when Lieutenant Zuhair Dawood shot down a US Navy FA-18, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Scott Spiker. Unfortunately for the Iraqi MiG-25s, this would be their last confirmed kill. A couple days later, 2 MiG-25s were shot down by F-15s. Despite being technologically outmatched, the Foxbat still caused some trouble on its way out. In one incident, a single MiG-25PD eluded 8 F-15s and fired 3 missiles at an EF-111A Raven, causing it to abandon its supporting jamming for a strike package. In another, 2 Foxbats approached a pair of F-15s, firing at them, but missing, but then evading 10 missiles from 4 F-15s before escaping unharmed. The last notable incident was in the Samura air battle, where an Iraqi Foxbat claimed to have damaged or destroyed an F-15C, although this is contested and no American records of this exist. After the war, an F-16D would down one last Foxbat that violated the no-fly zone with an AIM-120 AMRAAM, which would be the first F-16 air-to-air victory and the first AMRAAM kill. The MiG-25 did not see service in the Second Gulf War in 2003, as the Iraqi Air Force elected to bury many of them in the sand instead of risking losing them to bombing raids, a tactic which didn't pay off as American forces overran the airfields and eventually excavated them.
أقلام نعسة أكو عدة أهداف عادية بجنوب القائدة.
فاهم. سلايد عم بلف.
Cougar, this is Sunliners 1 reporting radar contact and requesting IFF confirmation. Tally 1 climbing off the airfield, hot and fast. Big mean yellow flames on the bastard, might be a Foxbat.
Sunliners 1, contact is not transmitting. Cannot IFF.
right past me.
عديته شو الأمر
ارجع للطريق اللي عن تراضي الوصلي.
This is Spike, readying first harm launch. Descending.
Contact 38 كيلو ماسك.
Hey, I'm getting locked here. What's going on?
29 كيلو إطلاق.
Fuck!
Zemlyane 2, report.
Shit. I think Spike's down.
ضربته
ضربة زينة. اتجه للجنوب للهدف الثاني.
حاضر.
Battle Axe, possible Foxbat high, 260 degrees, 60 miles from IKE, heading south.
Where's IKE? Is that near us?
شايفه حلف عليه.
Shit, that's our RDR.
أيوة عندي واحد على الرادار. عندي إذن لإطلاق صاروخ.
مرفوض. اتأكد بالهدف ويا عيونك.
He's right there behind us. Why isn't he shooting?
صرت قريب ممكن أطلق الصاروخ.
مرفوض.
شنو هو قدامي ياكو؟
بك 29 طارت قبل 10 دقائق وضيعناها. ممكن انت تواجهها.
لا بطيئة كتير مش ميج 29.
احتاجك تسحب وترجع للقائدة.
حاضر مبعد.
Fuck, that was too close. I was wondering what that missile would look like coming off the rail.
In War Thunder, the MiG-25PD was recently added to the game, and wow, I have been waiting years to finally be able to say that. As a Rank 7 marketplace purchasable event vehicle in the Soviet air tree, it was the main aircraft prize of the recently finished Winter Concert event. I'll start by going over the airframe itself before going over its subsystems and weapons, and then I'll go over how to make the best use of it in-game. As a high-speed, high-altitude, brute force interceptor, the Foxbat flies beautifully. Its two R-15 engines provide a simply ludicrous amount of thrust, with good acceleration, despite its low apparent TWR. As it's so heavily geared towards being an interceptor, its performance on the deck isn't great. When you're not up in space, get ready to see reduced speed flashing atop your screen constantly. This is an important warning, as its rip speed of 1,320 km an hour IAS is actually subsonic right at the deck, although at high altitude the MiG-25PD can, in fact, reach Mach 3, making it the fastest plane in War Thunder. When it comes to maneuverability, the MiG-25 performs as expected, rather poorly. It's not capable of dogfighting, especially as it lacks any form of gun, and has a turn radius more similar to a battleship than a fighter. When looking at the Foxbat's weapons, you have three options available. You have two infrared homing Fox 2 missiles available, the first of which is the R-60M. These can be double mounted on your outer pylons, allowing you to bring up to 4. They are all aspect and pull 30 Gs, making them almost undodgeable when launched well. However, they are incredibly flare hungry, almost always biting the first flare they see, and so are very easily avoided by people who are paying attention and have flares. Your second IR missile is the R-40TD, which is the infrared variant of your R-40. We'll cover the SARH variant in a second. You can bring up to 2 of these on the inner pylons. This is much longer range than the R-60, but pulls substantially less. It's similar to an R-24T, and can often snipe people from long ranges if they don't notice you launching or randomly flare, but can be dodged if it runs out of energy. Unfortunately, it lacks IRCCM, so most planes will flare it, with a similar seeker in terms of flare resistance to an AIM-9L. Your semi-active radar homing Fox 1 is the R-40RD, which shares the same body as the R-40TD, but with a radar seeker. You can bring up to 4 of these, 1 on each pylon. This, as a Fox 1, has to be continuously guided by your radar, and isn't fire and forget. Despite that, it's the MiG-25PD's definitive weapon, and will likely dictate the majority of your engagements with it. The R-40RD is most similar to the R-24R, despite having almost twice the same mass, as it has a relatively short burn time of 4 seconds, almost 800 meters per second of delta V, and a pull of 20 Gs, although that figure is somewhat misleading. The R-40 has a proximity fuse arming delay of 4 seconds, which means it's not suitable for close range shots, as, due to its high acceleration, it will likely be past the target, and unless it scores a direct hit, it won't detonate. Despite its huge weight and low G limit of 20 Gs, the R40RD is actually quite maneuverable for a radar missile of its BR, due to its large fins and high fin AOA, only really being outperformed by the AIM-7F in that aspect. The R40RD also has IOG, so if it loses lock but the target doesn't maneuver, it can still score a hit. With the talk about radar missiles, it's now important to bring up the MiG-25PD's radar. The Sapphire 25 is best described as a capable yet frustrating J-band pulse radar, with a series of quirks that can make it difficult to use, especially for those with little experience. The radar lacks a narrow scan option, as well as any sort of ACM or HMD mode, meaning you'll have to use your normal wide scan and select targets from that. This is compounded by its rather slow scan search pattern. Once you manage to get that lock, however, it's rather quite good at holding it against ground clutter, especially when compared to other pulse radars like the F4Es and MiG-21s, although it does get blown out of the water by pulse Doppler radars. It's certainly not immune to ground clutter, but it's better than many people seem to believe. This radar also has an MTI mode, which enables it to be quite good at locking targets at very low altitudes. Unfortunately, much like the MiG-23, this is limited to only flying 1600 meters above the terrain, and with your nose pointed below the horizon. Due to the Foxbat's flight performance at these altitudes, this is something you'll rarely want to do. Another, and perhaps the most notable weakness of the radar, is chaff. It almost immediately gets spoofed by chaff, which means that if your radar is chaffed before you launch, your missile will just go for the chaff. If you manage to get a launch off while having the target locked, however, the missile's CW seeker can still guide onto the target as long as it stays in the radar's cone, unless the target notches the missile itself, which is very useful against people who chaff last minute, or if the target doesn't maneuver after chaffing. Finally, as a J-band radar, you may run into a number of targets that cannot detect you with their RWR, such as the F4EJ, the MiG-23 MLD, and other aircraft equipped with RWRs that can't pick up J-band, like the APR-25 and SPO-15. The MiG-25PD's IRST is also quite useful, especially as it doesn't give off an RWR ping. This is quite useful, especially for locking R40TDs, as your missiles will slave to it. As it has a faster search pattern and can be switched to a more narrow scan mode, this can actually be used as an impromptu ACM mode for your radar if you lock a target with the IRST and then switch to radar. Your RWR is the rather old SPO-10, which isn't amazing as it doesn't have launch warning and only displays in 4 sectors without target ID. With that said, it at least detects J-band, so you'll get a warning about other MiG-25s. You also get 64 countermeasures to split between flares and chaff. Unlike many other guides you may have already seen on the Foxbat from other creators, this guide was written after it became publicly available, so I will go into how to fight other MiG-25s, something that, especially at the time of writing, you will find yourself doing a lot of until the hype dies down. In Air RB, the MiG-25PD sits at 11.0, where it's a very strong aircraft when played right, despite being very easy to play wrong. Before spawning in, I'd recommend taking 80% fuel and no drop tank, while splitting your countermeasures to around 24-40. For loadouts, I personally like using 2 R40RDs and 2 R40TDs, although once the MiG-25 swarms die down a little, I might recommend running 2 R40RDs, 1 R40TD, and 2 R60Ms, if you can stomach asymmetrical loadouts. Alternatively, you can bring 3 R40RDs if you're comfortable with them. In any situation, I wouldn't recommend taking less than 2 R40RDs, as your IR missiles are all flareable. In order to be successful with the Foxbat, you're going to need to play into its advantages. When you spawn in, level out and accelerate up to Mach 1 before starting your climb. Once you reach a high enough altitude, you can level out. Depending on the map and your preference, you can aim for anywhere between 6-7 kilometers all the way up to above 10. The MiG-25 is built for BVR, so you're often going to find yourself taking such a fight at the start. Look around your altitude or below for targets. I'd recommend pitching down your radar a little to allow you to do that, especially during your climb. Once you have someone, look at what they're doing. If they're chaffing, check around for other targets. If they're approaching you, they're likely your ideal target. Once you have a good launch, often around 30 kilometers or below, assuming they're heading towards you, fire at them and then turn into a crank. You'll likely want to drop some chaff or even a flare or two as a precaution. Make sure not to turn too hard, as you want your radar to maintain lock, just towards the edge of your scope so that you're not closing into an enemy missile faster than they are to yours. Especially if your RWR is giving you a track warning. Remember, you don't get launch warnings. If your target chaffs, don't turn off your lock immediately, as your missile might still use its CW guidance to hit the target anyway. After the initial jousts have finished and you're no longer being threatened from your own altitude, it's time to start looking down. Focus on targets at medium altitudes first, as your radar shouldn't have any issues with them. A crucial part about playing the MiG-25, especially after the early game, is remaining unspotted. It's not actually that great at clutching games, since a target aware of you with countermeasures can hard counter everything you throw at it. Your IR missiles can be easily flared, and your radar can be pre-chaffed. Using R40TDs from above, especially against flareless targets, is huge. R60Ms can also do that purpose, but you have to be closer and risk being spotted. You can also try to use your R40TDs against other MiG-25s at the start of the match, as many won't be randomly flaring. Speaking of other MiG-25s, the Foxbat has one Achilles heel that can really catch you off guard. The huge engines run very hot. Unlike most planes, where sometimes you'll need to cut your burner to flare a missile, the MiG-25's engines run so incredibly hot that you'll need to literally turn them off to have even a chance at flaring a rare aspect missile. Even the normally flare-hungry R60Ms will feel like they have IR-CCM. If you find yourself cleaning up attackers like A-10s at the end of the match, this is where your radar's MTI mode will come in handy, as it's your best way to target deck huggers that have flares. Don't be afraid to return to base to rearm. You don't have a cannon and you're not a dogfighter, so you really need to make sure that you're topped up on your missile kit. Many matches will, unfortunately, depend on your team. While you certainly can impact the battle by getting important early game kills, if the rest of your team collapses, you'll be hard pressed to pull a win out, especially as you can't hit ground targets, bomb bases, or even reliably deal with someone sitting on the airfield. The Foxbat definitely benefits from flying in a squad, as having a wingman or two to support you, especially if one is in a different aircraft, can really make a huge difference. All in all, I find the MiG-25PD an absolute joy to fly, and I am so happy to finally see my favourite aircraft now in War Thunder. If you'd like to use the MiG-25PD in Ground RB, have you been watching the rest of the video? You are aware that this has no gun, no ground ordnance, and struggles with low-flying aircraft, right? Get out of here! Once you've gotten your paws on the MiG-25PD, you're going to want to spade it. You get 2 R40RDs and 4 R60M stock, so you'll be using that loadout for a while. Start with researching flares and chaff to allow you to survive BVR jousts against opponents, especially other Foxbats. With that done, you have 2 choices. If you're eager to use the R40TDs, go research the R40RD, R40TD, and new boosters. Otherwise, grab new boosters and airframe. Next, grab wings repair and engine before working back to grab compressor, cover, fuselage repair, and airframe if you went for missiles. If you haven't got them yet, now would be the time to grab the R40s before finishing off with EFS and G-Suit, which we've left for last as you will rarely be pulling high Gs. And that's it for the MiG-25PD as it currently stands in War Thunder. In the future, it might be interesting to see some other variants of the Foxbat, such as the P and the RB, but I think the aircraft most people will be looking forward to is the MiG-31 and its variants. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. As I said in the past, the Foxbat has long been my favourite aircraft, so this is a video I've wanted to make since I started my channel, and I'm so happy that I've finally gotten the chance to do so. I can only hope that I've done it justice. If you think I have, then liking and subscribing would go a long way and would really help me to continue to grow this channel. After this video premieres, there'll be a poll in my Discord, link in the description, for the topic of the next one. I'm going to cap this video off with a faithful recreation I've made in War Thunder of one of the edits that got me into the MiG-25, and arguably jets as a whole, Mauzer's since deleted MiGs of Fire. I'll link a re-upload in the description if you'd like to check it out for yourself and compare, although if there's enough interest, I might re-upload it as a bonus standalone. And that's all from me. I've been Girltwink. Fly safe.